Hello again, my name is Sam Robinson, and this is the Gnostic Syncretist podcast and channel. Thank you for joining me today. In our last video, we were going over the concept of awakening to the occulted veils, the occulted nature through the veils, the cover of our true reality. Whether that's the world systems, the institutions, the cozy little narratives that we have been programmed to believe in since birth, and all the different layers and aspects to the multiplexity of this awakening process. But there's all these layers that you peel back like an onion, and that with so many people sort of started to wake up, at least to the level of corruption going on through the Epstein Files. It was seen proper and, poignant to go into the awakening process and the many pitfalls and many misdirections that can easily bog one down in this process to where they never get to the full truth. They never get through the first couple layers into any of the deeper layers of the rabbit hole, like, so to speak, taking a quarter of the red pill, not the whole thing, and really ends up being almost blue pilled, because that's one of the ways to keep us asleep, is to foment many versions of false awakening and many different rabbit holes that are misleading, or many different, alternative narrative disseminators that are controlled opposition to a degree, or even if they're not controlled opposition, have fallen for one of the other fields of research engineered by the elite social engineers and psychological manipulators to fall into, such as Flat Earth and many others. And that the point of the awakening process was that it doesn't really end, for the most part. It continually goes on, and that layer upon layer will be destroyed of your previous worldviews to be replaced by darker but more factually correct and real versions of our actual reality that we live in. And this has to be done because we unfortunately do live in a rather dark time, where a lot of things that are transpiring simply could not have been effectuated or implemented by the power elite in other time periods because of the technology we have now. The engineering of mass consciousness through algorithms and digital infrastructures, monopolized digital infrastructures, simply did not exist in prior time periods. And if it had, clearly they would have used it, but they didn't have it yet. So, and the point of that last video was to constantly reiterate, well, first it was to explain how the awakening process begins as these little, piercings of the veil begin. There's layers behind that layer, and then behind that layer, and then behind that layer. And, you're always pushing back against another layer. And that, as any good CIA director would do, or whoever it is, they've seeded all these false layers and false narratives and false truthers all over the entire system of information, digital ecosystem, to plant seeds of misdirection, plant seeds of tunnel vision to plant seeds of here's the final truth, there is no more, to have you have another version of the media give you the truth instead of you searching it out for yourself, which takes a lot of work, but is much more correct if done properly and as much for rewarding. And just instead of having another mouthpiece. Now, I'm not saying we all build on the shoulders of giants, obviously, because I'm obviously indebted to the people that came before me, Michael Tessarians, the David Icks, the Jordan Maxwells, the Mark Passios, and all the researchers and writers like Anthony Sutton and Jager Griffin and Carol Quigley and many others. And so I wanted to explain that if and when you start to wake up, don't think that you're going to, one, find the answers quickly, two, find an individual that will give you all of them. As opposed to using the mainstream media, you use mainstream alternative media or use some one individual. Unfortunately, most individuals, except for a very rare few, like a Mark Passio, or, David Icke maybe, have studied every field of knowledge necessary to get the full gamut of the awakening process. Because there's just so many things to study. And you can study all that infrastructure. But the real awakening is something much more spiritual, something much more metaphysical. A higher knowing that you are something more, that the human being is more than we've been led to believe from the materialistic conceptual framework that has been foisted upon us by scientism and the power-lead academic infrastructure. And, a big part of this all has to do with the awakening from the drops of the recent release of millions of Epstein documents that people are, going through right now. And, of course, for some of us who spoke about Epstein and what was really going on like 6-7 years ago, now they call you and they ask, what's actually going on? We thought you were crazy. Running industrial scale trafficking, satanic trafficking rings and things like that, really dark stuff involving children and trafficking and rituals on a scale most people can barely comprehend, much less even want to acknowledge the level of it. And so this release and the COVID years has started this awakening, but part of it's been hijacked by new infrastructure they're putting in, and now AI is coming about, and algorithmic control, and the rest of that is trying to kind of put a stopgap on the awakening process. And I've done some videos on this before. But what people need to understand is that the Epstein situation, the files, what was going on, that conceptual framework of that thing that they were doing and engaging in, as sick and disgusting and in a way demonic as it seems to be on the surface, because it is, there's something much deeper, something much darker going on here, something that ties in with other conceptual frameworks that aren't always tied into this, and thus it makes the Epstein situation seem isolated, not like he's an isolated case, but isolated from the other narratives like technocracy, like transhumanism, like scientific materialism, like genetic engineering, and manipulating the human genome and DNA. And these really kind of mad scientist type projects that are being funded and engaged in large-scale operations through things like DARPA and various other elite-controlled scientific institutional organizations that we're probably not even aware of, to be honest. And I think in a large sense, as Gigi Young has said, I feel like a lot of people might be missing the bigger picture here. And from the Epstein Files and the awakening it's starting. Unfortunately, a lot of these people are experienced. They don't really understand what's going on. They know this is something horrible that's now basically been admitted, and nobody really believes he killed himself anymore. And that they definitely don't think he was an isolated case, regardless of what Kash Patel says or anybody else in the government. It hasn't gone away, and it's not going away. We may not ever see any more of those files, and who knows what was redacted and kept from us. But the things that we can know are quite near certain regarding Epstein, which is that this was all it was not just simply having to do with some sort of weird predilections of the aristocracy and what they enjoy on the side, and as dark as it is, there's something much deeper going on with Epstein and what surrounded Epstein, because he was involved with lots of scientists. He was involved with lots of scientists, and if you understand what this international elite group wants and their long-term goals, like their real serious long-term goals, it is a technocratic world system that is run with artificial intelligence, but very specifically, and this is talked about but not enough, it's transhumanist. It's post-human in a large sense. A post-human world system, a transhumanist world system. The merging of human and technology in a sort of mad scientist dystopian concept. And that this is their end goal. It's not just a new world order. It's not just a technocracy. It is a transhumanist religious ideology that drives these psychopathic power elite individuals. It's a unifying theme with a lot of them. And you don't always see it in every field of study, like the Epstein Files, which just ties into all this. You see it with like Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley elite, and artificial intelligence, and at the World Economic Forum with Yuval Noah Harari, this merging and manipulation of genetics and biology, and mixing that in with technology and re-engineering of the human to be some sort of a cyborg-like transhumanist being, the singularity. And Zora Ranch is not spoken about enough, and I'm not going to say I know a ton about Zora Ranch specifically, but I know that there's a lot of weird goings on at Zora Ranch, and that Epstein was into some very, very strange stuff, like seeding his genome in individuals, like impregnating, either wanting to or maybe doing so. I'm not sure which. Hundreds of people. He wanted to impregnate hundreds of people, spread his genes around, and it sounds like some but there were scientists involved with him, and that's on record. There's all sorts of scientists and institutions that he made contact with and exchanged emails with, and a guy that is tied in with these elite circles, but seems to be like their pawn, may not have been their pawn, and in a certain sense may be tied in his own strange predilections for wanting to, impregnate hundreds of women and spread his genomes around the world, and do this type of a mad scientist project on reproduction, on a reproductive scale, of seeding his genes around the world, or in laboratory conditions that then get disseminated out into a wider scale. That may sound like just some weird fantasy or some thing that he desired to do and maybe didn't do, and it seems like maybe an isolated, an anomalistic case for just this one strange, sick, dark guy. But if you bear in mind the conceptual frameworks of technocracy, transhumanism, in the elite realm in general, and how this is, in a large sense, their religion, their religious belief system in these circles is a post-human, transhumanist merging of human and machine reality that they want to create. And to do that, obviously, they would have to engage in genetic engineering. They'd have to engage in biotechnological engineering, mixing biology with technology, playing around with the genomes, playing around with genetics, playing around with nanotechnology, and within the biology of what? Well, experiments. There'd have to be experiments being engaged in an operational at scale level to actually gain the information and knowledge they would require to ever come close to merging man with machine. Because it's not, I guarantee it's not some simple process that they can just do. Whatever they're doing with artificial intelligence and how quite quickly that's moving is not the same level of biotechnological engineering that they want to do. Transhumanist engineering. Now, we're not sure exactly what they have accomplished. All we know is what Elon Musk has accomplished, or the ones that we're allowed to know about with his little brain chip business, which is probably just a distraction, to be honest. And so when we hear this stuff about Epstein and some of the weird things he was into and some of the weird things he did at Zora Ranch and engaging in industrial scale trafficking of people in general, children at the worst, you have to remind yourself and not hone in on the sick, perverted nature of the whole thing. Because that may have been just a slice of the real situation. And the real situation, speculatively, but could very largely have had something to do with the elite's desire for a transhuman world. And they could have used Epstein as a front man and a staging ground at his various compounds for engaging in large-scale experimentation on humans. To do that, we know the elite are interested in biotechnology. We know the elite love artificial intelligence. We know they want to merge biology with the machine and the singularity and turn us into a cyborg in a transhumanist world system. But you have to try to accomplish that, obviously. How are you going to do that? Well, how are you going to get enough people to do that? I mean, to actually run through the essentially human experimentation on a large scale to get the data and the experiential information and necessary to actually merge the two, human and technology. Because I guarantee it's not some easily accomplishable scientific feat, and that they're going to have to work really hard to pull that off. So how are they going to do that? Well, it might behoove them to utilize a blackmail operation with a intelligence base, a blackmail intelligence operation through whatever, Anglo-American or Israeli or all three or whatever, in terms of, obviously blackmailing politicians and things, probably to maybe look the other way or just to control them. But then what else can you do? You got to expand your thinking on this. What else can you do with large-scale trafficking? Well, you can disappear large numbers of people within that same operation. It could be it could be one, the whole thing is, so to speak, trafficking. But what does that mean? That means you're basically taking people out of the system, you're disappearing them, in the sense that they're no longer in the system. No one knows where they are, and yeah, maybe some of them are used for perverted reasons. That is one side of the coin. But on another side of the coin, you could say maybe some of it could be used for slave labor. That's just one thought. Also, if you're disappearing, large groups of people, you could also use them for human experimentation, obviously. And they would, obviously, if they're involved in biotechnology research and going to need a lot of humans to experiment on, how else are you going to do that? You can't use other animals. Not for that. To merge man and machine, you're going to have to work on man to do that. You can't take mice and rats and rabbits and monkeys. I mean, you might be able to do some of that, maybe try to merge them with a machine, but we're different, we're more complex. And that's your real goal anyway. So if you don't research and experiment in that very specific way for that very specific human-machine goal, you'll never get there. So what are you going to do? How do you pull it up? Well, you might very well create a multi-scale industrial operation of human trafficking for experimental purposes. And then you think about what Epstein was into, what the elite ideology is like, and you can kind of start to put the pieces together. Not only you can't know 100%, obviously, because they'll never release all the files, but it's very interesting to note that there's a much deeper, there most likely is a much deeper thing going on here. Something much darker. Stuff, something like human cloning, human genetic experimentation, human genetic engineering through the trafficking network to get the individuals to experiment on, to engage in biotechnological research in a very shadowy way that's outside the public eye, outside institutional control, outside regulative control, and use an individual, not a self-made, and a elite created billionaire, world-renowned trafficker, to do things like that, and to be their front man and their, so to speak, middleman to engage in that type of operation, while simultaneously, feeding their sick addictions and perversions. They could do all that. And there's probably a lot more than one Epstein out there, obviously. And in Britain you had Jimmy Savile. So, not that he was necessarily tied up as a scientist, but he's a big trafficker connected to the royal family. Jimmy Savile died without ever being arrested. And hundreds of cases spawned after his death. Abuse. What I think people are going to get lost in, so to speak, the sauce of the Epstein Files. And I think part of the reason these files have been released, first of all, I want to thank Thomas Massey for even getting anything released. That's the one guy that I can trust in the Congress. Even if I don't trust the institution itself, that guy really tries to get it done, and he's the only one. And he got it done. Now, of course, who has control of these files now? Well, the intelligence apparatus and national security state. They're going to only release as much as they want to. No matter how many millions of the files it is. They're going to release redacted information that, as Brett Weinstein has said in one of his recent podcasts, is going to have lots of innuendo and insinuate. There'll be lots of insinuations within the information released to tantalize you with conceptual situations from what's being said in the different emails between Epstein and other individuals, but not necessarily lead to anything. No one will be able to be, people's reputations will be destroyed, of course, but will they be arrested? Is it actionable material to be arrested them? Probably not, and it doesn't seem to be. Yet, you can get people to go down all these rabbit holes of information on the Epstein Files, especially newer people, this is why I'm talking about the awakening process, who don't really know how to navigate these waters. who've never tried to dive into some massive file dump of darkness like this and navigate their way through and sift through the information properly to ferret out the real connecting dots that are involved and what's really going on behind the scenes of the Epstein situation. And since most of them are not going to have any of the prior understanding or knowledge about transhumanism or technocracy and their machine religious mindset of the elite class, they're not going to factor that in, obviously. Why would they factor that in? They don't know anything about that. Most people don't know about transhumanism. They don't know about technocracy. They don't know about the merging of artificial intelligence and man as the ultimate religious belief and ritual of the dark occult elite class. That is what they believe. That is their goal. That is their system of religious doctrine. They want to bring in a transhumanist world of complete darkness, and it's religion to them. They think they're summoning the God, some sort of God, into that system, whether through artificial intelligence, robotics, man and machine robotics with artificial intelligence, whichever one they think will suit as a vehicle for their strange machine god entity that they want to summon from the darkest Borg. And they really believe this stuff. And the only way to accomplish that is through some sort of large-scale trafficking, disappearing operation like Epstein to get the necessary, so to speak, human material required for large-scale experimentation. How else are they ever going to merge the two? It would have to be done. They're not going to be able to use software, theoretical, number crunching and gene sequencings on a computer. They're going to have to get dirty. They're going to have to get down into the actual biology of all this to merge man and machine. So, and begs the question, what else was Epstein involved in? Because some of the stuff he said was quite strange, quite weird, and quite close to transhumanist ideological thinking. And if he was running in their circle and was one of them, that has to be tied in with his operation as a desired outcome and goal. Not just trafficking, but experimentation on humans, because you need that to actually do the biotechnological research. And it would probably be really dark stuff. We're talking fantastically dark. And I just want to put this out there because, it's very sensational, obviously, to talk about, power elite perversion and, the island and, which individuals of the political sphere have got, the most logs on his plane or on his island, or like who's connected to whom and what royal family and royal individual was the most tied in, and which one of our political elite did the most or did the worst, period. And that's all very fine and good. We should know what we're working with when it comes to all the politicians of the world, but those can all easily just simply become sensationalized distractions from the bigger agenda going on here, which has always been the same agenda, ladies and gentlemen, and that's transhumanism. That is the human 2.0 that they are trying to create in this world. And it requires a lot to try to do that. As arrogant as they seem, they haven't done it yet. And it's not going to be an easy feat to supplant God and do that and send us backward in evolution as they think it's a way forward, even though it's the inverse of that. It is de-evolution, not evolution. Permanent materialism instead of moving beyond to superphysical evolution. And that's another podcast, but I don't want people to start to wake up from the Epstein Files and get lost in that, get lost in just the sensationalized aspect of that story, narrative, operation. Clearly there's corruption going on. Clearly there's blackmail going on. Clearly there's trafficking going on on a disgusting and gross, dark scale. But that may not be the main point of it. That may be simply a side note to their operation. They may have been involved in something far darker, involving genetic engineering and human experimentation, I think. And I have no specific proof of that, but it doesn't take a lot of thinking when you know what their ideology is and how they're going to have to try to go about getting there and implementing transhumanism to think that they're going to need a lot of people to experiment on to do that. And human trafficking is the easiest way to get that done. To get those research specimens that, scientific cattle to experiment on, I mean, you've already seen us. I mean, we already do it to animals on a daily basis, all the time. It's disgusting and dark and horrifying. And in the medical field and other fields, if they're involved in that kind of stuff, what else are they involved in? Especially when their power elite ideology involves human merging with the machine. They're going to have to experiment on people. And that's the facts. There's no way around that. They're not taking chances with themselves until they're absolutely sure it can be done. I guarantee that. Because they want to become immortal through that transhumanist concept. And but they're also very selfish, and they're not simply going to throw their body in on the experimental table, not without tons of research done at a time, which will involve humans. And that's dark. It's pretty dark. And I think that that's one thing that people are missing when they think about the Epstein Files, is that they're not considering the fact that any sort of human trafficking operation could easily be used for research purposes. Especially when you can find that Epstein was into some very strange research and involved with a lot of scientific institutions and leading scientific individuals in various fields, and had very strange concepts about seeding his genome in place in different ways and different on a large scale thing, just weird stuff like that, stuff that easily would tie into genetic engineering on a human scale. And if they're willing to do what they do to children, you really think human experimentation's beyond them? No, of course not. Nothing for these dark occult psychopaths. There is nothing off the table. Everything is allowable. There are no rules. There is no morality. There's nothing but the goal. And the ends justifies the means, absolutely, for these people, and they would absolutely engage in that. So, I just want to make sure that the people waking up, and the people that are already researchers, don't miss, make sure that they don't, they see the forest for the trees, that the Epstein Files might have had behind it something far bigger than mere trafficking of underage people, and that there was something immensely darker going on that was international in scale and utilized by the international, transnational elite for specific purposes involving their religious ideology of transhumanism. And that this cannot be counted out at whatsoever, and would actually make, in a dark, dark way, a lot of sense. Make a lot of his weird statements much clearer in the context of all of this. And this is pretty dark stuff, I understand. And so I'm going to end it with that. Just remember, no one's been arrested. Reputations may be destroyed, but they live on. They may have to resign from their companies because of their ties. They may lose their academic prestige and reputation, but they are still free. They are not in jail. And, they can easily engineer distractions like Prince Andrew's arrest. But, how will we ever even really know if they're really arrested or if they're even going to stay in jail if they even say they put them in? Let's just say there's the possibility they will make some fall guys at a high level, like Prince Andrew possibly, to try to satiate the public anger at the injustices going on. This is a classic tactic of aristocrats in general and throughout history. They have to sate the public. They scapegoat somebody and sacrifice them basically to the public interest to get them off their trail, to get them to calm back down, to think that justice has been done and that the matter is resolved. So I'm waiting and looking for such an act to occur. And, it happened the other week with Prince Andrew being arrested. But you got to look at the fine print. He wasn't even arrested for trafficking or involving sexual perversion. He was arrested for mishandling documents between his government and Epstein, handing over classified materials or something stupid. Wasn't even really what we want to get him for, which was something disgusting and perverted, which is what he needs to be in jail for. He was not even arrested for that. He was arrested for something else. It had nothing to do with that. It was tied to Epstein, but it was tied to classified documents being given to Epstein, not to what it really should be. I don't even care. Who cares if he hands over classified documents? The British government's fully corrupt and a dark entity itself. So what? One dark entity handed classified documents over to another dark entity named Epstein. Big deal. Nobody cares. British government's garbage. Trash. Corrupt to the absolute core and at the heart of the entire world conspiracy. They don't care that he mishandled documents by handing them over to one of their own possible agents with Epstein. Because the royal family's all wrapped up in all this with Seville and him, Jimmy Seville and Epstein. So they didn't. That's just public, sensationalism. They didn't even arrest him for trafficking or anything involving abuse or perversion. There was mishandling documents. So just be aware and on the lookout for some sort of totally engineered fall guy operation with individuals, and that even that fall may also be faked. Because you got to look at the fine print to see what the people are really being arrested for, and even then say they are supposedly arrested for the things we want them to be and jailed. How will we ever know they're really still in there? In the past they actually did have to, eat their own to survive. The aristocrats, they had to do that. They had to placate the public because we would come in with pitchforks and fire and brimstone and literally riot into their world and demand it. And then they'd behead somebody. And that was real. Nowadays you can fake everything. Nowadays you can totally deep fake anything you want. Whether through whatever means. There's so many means now. So you never really know if anything they're telling us is true in the first place. So, and that's, it's the nature of our world. Layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of lies, deception, false innuendo, misdirection, deep fakes, psychological warfare, cognitive warfare, social engineering, the works. You got it all. And to top it all off, dark occultism pervades the entire apparatus of all those concepts I just mentioned. This is built on an occult knowledge of psychology in the end. So I just wanted to do a video on Epstein and kind of remind people that what we think we know may simply be the tip of the iceberg when it comes to this Epstein operation, whatever you want to call this. So that being said, thank you for watching. My name is Sam Robinson, and this is the Gnostic Secretist Podcast, and we will be doing more many more videos on other topics and other things. I certainly don't want to get bogged down with Epstein because there's plenty of people talking about him, but I think they're missing some of the stuff necessary to understand the larger picture here. And there's many larger pictures going on. World-shattering, dark operations on an occult level at scale. That is, I hate to say it, a lot bigger than just trafficking. So, as dark as that is. So, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share this around, and we will be seeing you very soon.